a phenomenon is unfolding quietly, though few notice it. The spiritually and psychologically awake are slowly disappearing from society. They do not vanish in tragedy or anger, but in silence. Step by step, they drift away from shallow conversations, close the circles of friendships built only on pretense, retreat from social media, and walk away from jobs that force them to wear masks. Why? Because the more conscious they become, the harder it is to breathe in a world saturated with collective unconsciousness. Jung called this the necessary withdrawal, a psychological stage that anyone walking the path of individuation must eventually face. Psychologically, it arises from the conflict between the persona and the self. Society runs on persona, the roles and masks we wear to be accepted. But when you begin to touch the self, the true center of your being, continuing to perform as before becomes a form of injury. Your body protests, your heartbeat quickens, your shoulders tense, your energy drains after meaningless meetings or hollow conversations. This is not a weakness. It is a psychological warning. You cannot keep living in constant pretense without betraying yourself. That is why the awakened choose to withdraw. They disappear from places once familiar, not because they despise people, but because they can no longer endure the clash between their inner light and the collective shadow outside. And this disappearance, paradoxically, is a step forward. It protects the fragile consciousness just emerging. It allows the inner shadow to be faced and integrated. It opens the door to a deeper stage of growth. This video will show you why disappearing is not a sign of failure or escape, but rather an essential chapter in the journey of awakening. You will see why withdrawal is the necessary step to guard the truth within, and how this stage prepares you for an entirely different return. The struggle that spiritually awake people face is not weakness, nor an inability to fit in. It is the growing difficulty of enduring a world full of masks. Jung called this the conflict between the persona and the self. The persona is the social mask you are forced to wear to be accepted. At work, you become the agreeable employee. Within family, you play the role of the responsible one. Among friends, you perform as the cheerful companion. But behind all of this, the self, the true center within, remains quietly present. And when the self begins to stir, every forced smile, every false agreement, every pretend interest feels like betrayal. What once seemed normal now becomes unbearable. If you pay close attention, the symptoms are familiar. A long meeting leaves your shoulders stiff as stone, simply because you nodded along with the crowd. A loud party leaves you emptier than it leaves you joyful. A social media update brings a fleeting relief, followed almost instantly by fatigue, because deep down you know you've just added another layer to the collective mask. The body reveals the truth. Quickened heartbeat, shallow breathing, vague exhaustion. These are not random. They are signals from the psyche that you no longer fit the old mold. From the lens of depth psychology, this is the moment when consciousness is growing, and the persona can no longer contain it. Society may see withdrawal as failure, but Jung understood it differently. It is the natural defense mechanism of a maturing consciousness. A mind that has awakened cannot pretend to sleep without consequence. And the cost is steep: anxiety, insomnia, chronic fatigue that no medical explanation can resolve. The true problem is not that you are disappearing. The true problem is that continuing to participate would mean abandoning the authentic life within you. If you sense yourself entering this stage, do not panic. This is not the end. It is the beginning of what Jung called the pain of consciousness. In the next part, we will explore why awakening brings discomfort, why it forces you to see truths others spend their lives avoiding, and how this pain is not punishment, but passage. Stay with me, because it is here you will realize you are not alone on this path. Carl Jung once said, "When an individual confronts the darkness within, they can no longer endure the darkness of the collective." This is the key to understanding why spiritually awakened people slowly disappear from public life. On the surface, society functions smoothly because of unspoken agreements. Everyone pretends to agree, and everyone plays along with the collective games without asking too many questions. But beneath that, psychologically, it is a mechanism built on the collective unconscious. We maintain illusions together. We push the shadow onto others. We convince ourselves the fault always belongs to the opposite side, the other group, the outsiders. For someone who has never dug deeper, this feels safe. But for someone who has entered the path of individuation, it becomes unbearable. Jung called this the burden of seeing. Once you begin to see clearly that political arguments are often nothing more than two sides projecting their shadows onto each other, you cannot unsee it. Once you understand that hatred, blame, or collective violence are just the unconscious searching for a place to discharge itself, you cannot pretend to take a side without betraying yourself. This is why the awakened often feel lonely even in a crowd. Psychologically, they are operating from a different level of consciousness, where the collective games suddenly appear transparent. Think back to the last time you joined a heated conversation about current events or social media. Others may have erupted with anger, demanded justice, and argued fiercely. But you noticed something beneath it. Fears without names. Fear of being abandoned. Fear of losing control. Fear of having no value. Once you see this, joining the argument no longer feels like a connection. It feels like watching a collective play you cannot act in. Jung himself described this experience, standing in a crowd and feeling as though everyone was speaking in a dream, while he was the only one awake. This creates a constant tension. Either you stay and pretend to sleep, or you withdraw to protect your awakening. And here, Jung insisted that withdrawal is not escape. It is a psychological necessity. Because if you stay too long in an unconscious environment, you will pay with your inner energy. Anxiety, depression, the bone-deep exhaustion that follows shallow interactions. Awakening makes you more sensitive to the energy around you, and what once passed as normal now feels like psychological violence. The important truth here is this: you are not alone. Jung saw this pattern in many of his patients. Everyone who steps into awakening must pass through this stage, feeling like an outsider, pushed away from the collective flow. In reality, this is a sign that you are moving deeper into individuation. And if you recognize this within yourself, I invite you to stay with this channel. Subscribe, and let's walk together. In the next parts, we will decode the unconscious mechanisms behind this phenomenon, and you will see why withdrawal is not weakness, but an inevitable stage of inner maturity. Jung once pointed out that the withdrawal of the awakened is not simply a personal choice, but the result of a deep, unconscious mechanism. Anyone walking the path of awakening must encounter 3 layers of this mechanism: the archetype of the hermit, the loop of the collective unconscious, and the breaking point of the self. The hermit archetype has appeared for millennia, in religion, in culture, in dreams. It is not the figure of escape, but of retreat to guard the inner flame. Jung saw this repeatedly in his patients. When they began confronting their personal shadow, when they dared to face the parts of themselves they had long denied. They could no longer endure the falseness of the outer world. What once felt normal suddenly became noise. Social gatherings left them gasping for breath, and relationships built only on roles became suffocating. The hermit does not run away to reject humanity, but to hold space for the truth that is being born. At the same time, society itself operates through the loop of the collective unconscious. To maintain surface stability, people project their shadow outward. One group blames another. A crowd demands a scapegoat to release its fury. This is how the collective unconscious finds a vent. But it is also why society spins endlessly in cycles of conflict. To the unawakened, this seems natural. To the awakened, the entire mechanism is visible, and once seen, they cannot participate without betraying themselves. Each attempt to play along triggers a bodily rebellion, exhaustion, sleepless nights, a racing heart, shoulders heavy as stone. These reactions are not weakness. They are the psyche's way of protecting itself from being dragged back into the loop. Then comes the individual breaking point. The moment when persona, the social mask, no longer fits the self, the true center within. Jung observed that once these two fall out of alignment, the psyche generates a crisis. For some, it manifests as chronic anxiety. For others, there is emptiness in the midst of crowds. For still others, there are physical symptoms like headaches or insomnia. These are not malfunctions. They are signals that you cannot go back. You must choose. Continue pretending to belong, or dare to withdraw to preserve what is real. Jung emphasized, this disappearance is not a mistake, but a passage. If you remain too long in the unconscious environment, you will pay with your mental health and your inner clarity. But if you dare to step back, you safeguard the fragile consciousness just beginning to form. From the outside, such withdrawal may look like loss. From the inside, it is salvation. When you begin to notice these signals in yourself, it means you have entered a new stage. Not a stage of ending, but of quiet rebirth. Imagine that inside you there is a bell. It does not hang in plain sight, but deep in a hidden corner, one you rarely pay attention to. For most of your life, its sound is drowned out by the noise of work, of news, of endless social chatter. But then, one day, as awakening begins, the bell rings with startling clarity. It is not urgent, not harsh, but steady, persistent, like a reminder of something you can no longer ignore. This bell rings in three ways. First, it rings through the body. Your chest tightens in a meeting that seems ordinary. Your shoulders sink after hours of polite laughter. Your breath becomes shallow as you endure conversations that hold no truth. The sound of the bell is not in your ears. It lives in the reactions of your body. Second, it rings through emptiness. You can stand in a crowded room, laughter and words colliding around you, and yet inside there is only a hollow space. That emptiness reverberates like the echo of a bell in an abandoned temple. The louder the noise outside, the deeper the resonance within, until you can no longer pretend not to hear it. Third, it rings with persistence. You may ignore it for a while, bury yourself in work, scroll endlessly through screens, but in the quiet moments, the sound returns. It never disappears. It waits, patient, until you are brave enough to listen. Jung once wrote that once consciousness has been awakened, it cannot be forced back to sleep. This bell is the symbol of that awakening. The bell does not demand immediate action. It only poses the question, will you keep pretending to be deaf, or will you admit that it is time to step back and protect the truth knocking from within? The awakened disappear from the noise of society not because they despise people, but because they have chosen to listen. And once you hear it, you know the sound never leaves you. If you have ever felt this bell ringing in your chest, you know it is both an unease and a guide. It unsettles you, but it also points to where you must go. And the moment you stop long enough to truly listen, that is when the real journey begins. When awakening begins, the clearest mirror is not philosophy or books, but your own daily behavior. Watch the way you react in seemingly ordinary moments. A casual chat with a coworker, where they tell stories that no longer feel meaningful, and yet you force a polite smile. Right after, your body feels drained, as if you've run a marathon. An evening scrolling through social media, passing dozens of posts filled with outrage, division, and blame. You no longer want to argue, but when you put the phone down, your chest feels heavy, your breath shortened. These are not random sensations. They are warning signals. Applied psychology would call them what they are: evidence that you are spending too much energy living against your true self. Jung explained that the more conscious you become, the more easily you notice the shadows being projected around you. But that very sensitivity brings loneliness, because to stay, you would have to pretend you don't see. And pretending is a subtle form of betrayal. This is why many awakened people seem distant, cold, or hard to approach. The truth is, they simply no longer want to burn themselves out playing old roles. If you look closely at yourself, perhaps you have noticed the same shift. Once, you could spend hours lost in noisy gatherings. Now, just a short while leaves you depleted. Once, you dove into heated debates with enthusiasm. Now, you see the repetition behind them, and your body forces you to withdraw. What once gave you a sense of belonging now feels like a burden, and beneath it all lies the deeper fear. If you walk away, will you lose everything? Jung believed this stage is the most fragile. If you ignore this mirror, if you force yourself to keep living the old script, you will slowly sever your connection with the self. The result is not only burnout, but lingering depression, chronic dissatisfaction, or exhaustion with no clear cause. Yet if you dare to listen, the mirror reflects more than loss. It reveals opportunity, the chance to remain loyal to the truth within you, even if it means standing alone. The difficulty is that society will not understand. It will label you as withdrawn, indifferent, or even a failure. But the psychological mirror never lies. Each time you notice your own fatigue after a day of pretending, it is proof that another path is calling you. And if you choose to take it, you will discover that withdrawal is not about losing. It is about reclaiming the parts of yourself you left behind for far too long. There is a danger here, one Jung warned of. If you keep looking at your withdrawal through the old lens, it will always feel like failure. But that is only because you are still naming it with the language of the past. In truth, stepping back is not an ending. It is a reframing. When you walk away from noisy spaces, you do not disappear. You are shifting from one frame of reference to another. The problem was never that you no longer fit into society. The problem is that society only accepts you in the form of a persona, while the self within you has begun to awaken. Start with language. Instead of saying, "I am lonely," try calling it, "I am reclaiming my psychological boundaries." Instead of, "I am disconnected," say, "I am learning how to connect for real." Language creates experience. When you tell yourself you are avoiding, you bind yourself to guilt. But when you say, "I am protecting my awareness," the entire story changes. Jung emphasized that individuation cannot happen if you still live under the labels imposed by the collective. The deepest fear in this stage is that you will disappear forever, that no one will recognize you anymore. But if you look closer, hidden inside that fear is liberation. You don't need everyone to see you. You only need to see yourself. And once you dare to stay loyal to the self, you will begin to attract those who resonate at the same depth. This is the paradox. The moment you stop striving to belong, you finally find where you belong. Jung described those who step out of the collective but don't sever completely as border dwellers. They are not gone from the world, but they are no longer consumed by it. They live at the edge, close enough to observe, far enough not to be swallowed. And it is here, at the border, that they discover a kind of peace the noisy crowd can never offer. What you need now is a new language to define your experience. Don't call it loneliness. Call it space. Don't call it loss. Call it release. Don't call it disappearance. Call it quiet rebirth. Language doesn't just describe, it shapes the path you take. And the way you name what is happening will decide how you live through it. If you notice yourself withdrawing from social conversations, don't frame it as a retreat. See it as choosing dialogue with your inner life. If you step out of endless arguments, don't call it indifference. Call it loyalty to truth. Reframing gives you agency. You are no longer a victim society has excluded. You are someone choosing another way to exist. But here is the warning. If you don't dare to reframe, the collective unconscious will do it for you. You will be drowned in labels, worthless, unrecognized, irrelevant. And in the end, you will slip back into the old mask just to survive. That is the true cost, losing the self that has just awakened. There is nothing heavier than betraying your own emergence. And once you understand this, the next question naturally arises. How do you keep that loyalty alive in daily life? There are small but concrete steps, ways of living that make your withdrawal not a drift into isolation, but the foundation of a more authentic form of existence. To make withdrawal not turn into isolation, you need small daily actions that keep the self alive. Jung emphasized that change doesn't always come from grand decisions, but from quiet habits that give consciousness a place to root. The first action is to carve out a fixed moment of silence each day. Just 5 or 10 minutes, no screens, no dialogue, only the rhythm of your own breath. This is not a complicated meditation. It is simply giving the inner bell space to ring clearly. The second action is to write down the moments when you feel drained after an encounter. Note what stole your energy and what left you alive. Psychology calls this tracking triggers, mapping the points that pull you away from self and the places that feed it. The third action is to choose at least one relationship where you can exist without a mask. It could be a single friend, a small circle, or even a conversation with yourself on the page. Each time you are allowed to show up without acting, the self grows stronger. And finally, permit yourself to say no to spaces that hold you only out of habit. Every refusal is a retrieval of your psychological boundary. Every no, a quiet declaration. I am protecting my awareness. This path does not ask you to change the whole world. It only asks you to change how you stand inside it, from pretending to exist to truly being present. The cost of ignoring the call within is never small. If you choose to keep wearing the mask just to fit in, the psyche will protest in familiar ways. Lingering anxiety, fatigue without cause, an emptiness that follows you even in the middle of a crowd. You will laugh when you don't want to laugh, nod when every cell in you longs to say no, and remain in relationships that make you feel lonelier than solitude itself. This is the silent tragedy of countless people. They don't vanish from the world, but they slowly dissolve away from themselves. Jung called this the betrayal of the self, when the true center is suffocated by the persona. He warned that to live too long in this state not only drains the spirit, but also allows the unintegrated shadow to keep ruling you. You believe you are preserving stability, but in truth, you are letting the unconscious steer your fate. And the unconscious, when left unseen, always returns as destiny. The opposite is also true. When you dare to step into conscious withdrawal, new qualities begin to emerge. Instead of anxiety, you begin to feel stillness. Instead of fearing abandonment, you rediscover wholeness. This disappearance is not weakness, but the gathering of energy. Like a seed hidden in soil before it breaks into a tree, you too need this silence to restructure yourself. Here the philosophy of Jung rings clear. He who looks outside dreams. He who looks inside awakens. You are not disappearing from the world. You are only turning your gaze. And in that shift lies the birth of a different way of living, one where energy is no longer wasted on performance, but conserved for true presence. The warning is sharp. If you ignore the call to retreat when your psyche demands it, you risk losing the ability to hear the inner voice at all. And when that voice goes silent, you may keep existing, but it will be a life blurred, drained of vitality. Jung believed this was the greatest danger of all, to live a life that never touches the self. But if you choose to protect your awareness, even at the cost of temporary comfort, you will keep the most precious thing, loyalty to truth. And from that ground, you will discover a freedom no crowd, no applause, no persona could ever grant you. Imagine stepping out of a crowded marketplace, where voices collide and sellers push the same wares from every corner. The noise is constant, the pull relentless. Then, just beyond, you notice a small garden. No one competes there, no one calls out for your attention. Only a narrow path covered in fallen leaves and a quiet stone bench waiting for you to sit. In that moment, you realize you have not disappeared from the world. You have simply found a space to breathe. The disappearance of the spiritually awake is just like this. It is not abandonment, but a conscious choice. Stepping back from the noise so you can hear the bell within. Leaving the masks behind so you can remember there is still a self beneath. And from this silence, one day, you will return, not as who you were, but as someone carrying a light that has been nurtured long enough in the dark to finally shine. Before you leave this video, give yourself one simple gift. 1 minute of silence. Just to listen. Is there a bell ringing somewhere inside you? If there is, remember, you are not alone in this journey. And in the next videos, we will open other doors together. Places where disappearance is no longer something to fear, but a necessary step in your evolution.